Fascinating Fascism. First exhibit, here is a book of 126 splendid color photographs by Leni Riefenstahl, certainly the most ravishing book of photographs published anywhere in recent years. In the intractable mountains of the southern Sudan live about 8,000 aloof, godlike Nuba, emblems of physical perfection with large, well-shaped, partly shaven heads, expressive faces, and muscular bodies that are depilated and decorated with scars. Smeared with sacred gray-white ash, the men prance, squat, brood, wrestle on the arid slopes. And here's a fascinating layout of 12 black and white photographs of Riefenstahl on the back cover of The Last of the Nuba. Also ravishing, a chronological sequence of expressions, from sultry inwardness to the grin of a Texas matron on safari, vanquishing the intractable march of aging. The first photograph was taken in 1927 when she was 25 and already a movie star. The most recent are dated 1969. She is cuddling a naked African baby. In 1972, she is holding a camera. And each of them shows some version of an ideal presence, a kind of imperishable beauty, like Elizabeth Schwarzkopf's, that only gets gayer and more metallic and healthier looking with old age. And here is a biographical sketch of Riefenstahl on the dust jacket, and an introduction unsigned entitled How Leni Riefenstahl Came to Study the Mexican Nuba of Kordofan, full of disquieting lies. The introduction, which gives a detailed account of Riefenstahl's pilgrimage to the Sudan, inspired, we are told, by reading Hemingway's The Green Hills of Africa, quote, one sleepless night in the mid-50s, laconically identifies the photographer as something of a mythical figure as a filmmaker before the war, half forgotten by a nation which chose to wipe from its memory an era of its history, who, one hopes, but Riefenstahl herself could have thought up this fable about what is mistily referred to as a nation which, for some unnamed reason, chose to perform the deplorable act of cowardice of forgetting an era, tactfully left unspecified, of its history. Presumably, at least some readers will be startled by this coy allusion to Germany and the Third Reich. Compared with the introduction, the jacket of the book is positively expansive on the subject of the photographer's career, parroting misinformation that Riefenstahl has been dispensing for the last 20 years. It was during Germany's blighted and momentous 1930s that Leni Riefenstahl sprang to international fame as a film director. She was born in 1902, and her first devotion was to creative dancing. This led to her participation in silent films, and soon she was herself making and starring in her own talkies, such as The Mountain, 1929. These tensely romantic productions were widely admired, not least by Adolf Hitler, who, having attained power in 1933, commissioned Riefenstahl to make a documentary on the Nuremberg Rally in 1934. It takes a certain originality to describe the Nazi era as Germany's blighted and momentous 1930s. To summarize the events of 1933 as Hitler's having attained power, and to assert that Riefenstahl, most of whose work was in its own decade correctly identified as Nazi propaganda, enjoyed international fame as a film director, ostensibly like her contemporaries Renoir, Lubitsch, and Flaherty. Could the publishers have let L.R. write the jacket copy herself? One hesitates to entertain so unkind a thought, although her first devotion was to creative dancing, is a phrase few native speakers of English would be capable of. The facts are, of course, inaccurate or invented. Not only did Riefenstahl not make or star in a talkie called The Mountain, 1929, no such film exists. More generally, Riefenstahl did not first simply participate in silent films and then, when sound came in, begin directing and starring in her own films. In all 9 films she ever acted in, Riefenstahl was the star, and 7 of these she did not direct. These 7 films were The Holy Mountain, Der Heilige Berg, 1926, The Big Jump, Der Großsprung, 1927. The Fate of the House of Habsburg, Das Schicksal der von Habsburg, 1928. The White Hell of Piz Palu, Die Weiße Hall vom Piz Palu. All Silence, followed by Avalanche, Sturm über dem Mont Blanc, 1930. White Frenzy, Der Weiße Rausch, 1931. And SOS Iceberg, 1932 to 1933. All but one were directed by Arnold Fanck, auteur of hugely successful Alpine epics since 1919, who made only 2 more films, both flops, after Riefenstahl left him to strike out on her own as a director in 1932. The film not directed by Fanck is The Fate of the House of Habsburg, a royalist weepy made in Austria in which Riefenstahl played Marie Vetsera, Crown Prince Rudolph's companion at Mayerling. No print seems to have survived. Fanck's pop Wagnerian vehicles for Riefenstahl were not just tensely romantic. No doubt thought of as apolitical when they were made, these films now seem in retrospect, as Siegfried Krakauer has pointed out, to be an anthology of proto-Nazi sentiments. Mountain climbing in Fanck's films was a visually irresistible metaphor for unlimited aspiration toward the high mystic goal, both beautiful and terrifying, which was later to become concrete in Führer worship. The character that Riefenstahl generally played was that of a wild girl who dares to scale the peak that others, the valley pigs, shrink from. In her first role in The Silent the Holy Mountain, 1926, that of a young dancer named Diotima, she is wooed by an ardent climber who converts her to the healthy ecstasies of alpinism. This character underwent a steady aggrandizement. In her first sound film, Avalanche, 1930, Riefenstahl is a mountain-possessed girl in love with a young meteorologist whom she rescues when a storm strands him in his observatory on Mont Blanc. Riefenstahl herself directed 6 films, the first of which, The Blue Light, Das Blaue Licht, 1932, was another mountain film. Starring in it as well, Riefenstahl played a role similar to the ones in Fanck's films, for which she had been so widely admired, not least by Adolf Hitler, but allegorizing the dark themes of longing, purity, and death that Fanck had treated rather scoutishly. As usual, the mountain is represented as both supremely beautiful and dangerous, that majestic force which invites the ultimate affirmation of and escape from the self, into the brotherhood of courage and into death. The role Riefenstahl devised for herself is that of a primitive creature who has a unique relation to a destructive power. Only Junta, the rag-clad outcast girl of the village, is able to reach the mysterious blue light radiating from the peak of Mount Cristallo, while other young villagers lured by the light try to climb the mountain and fall to their deaths. What eventually causes the girl's death is not the impossibility of the goal symbolized by the mountain, but the materialist, prosaic spirit of envious villagers and the blind rationalism of her lover, a well-meaning visitor from the city. The next film Riefenstahl directed after The Blue Light was not, quote, a documentary on the Nuremberg Rally in 1934, end of quote. Riefenstahl made 4 nonfiction films, not 2, as she has claimed since the 1950s and as most current whitewashing accounts of her repeat. But Victory of the Faith, Sieg des Glaubens, 1933, celebrating the first National Socialist Party Congress held after Hitler seized power. Then came the first of 2 works which did indeed make her internationally famous. The film on the next National Socialist Party Congress, Triumph of the Will, 1935, whose title is never mentioned on the jacket of The Last of the Nuba. After which she made a short film, 18 minutes, for the Army, Day of Freedom, Our Army, 1935, that depicts the beauty of soldiers and soldiering for the Führer. It is not surprising to find no mention of this film, a print of which was found in 1971. During the 1950s and 1960s, when Riefenstahl and everyone else believed Day of Freedom to have been lost, she had it dropped from her filmography and refused to discuss it with interviewers. The jacket copy continues. Riefenstahl's refusal to submit to Goebbels' attempt to subject her visualization to his strictly propagandistic requirements led to a battle of wills which came to a head when Riefenstahl made her film of the 1936 Olympic Games, Olympia. This Goebbels attempted to destroy. and it was only saved by the personal intervention of Hitler. With two of the most remarkable documentaries of the 1930s to her credit, Riefenstahl continued making films of her devising, unconnected with the rise of Nazi Germany, until 1941, when war conditions made it impossible to continue. Her acquaintance with the Nazi leadership led to her arrest at the end of the Second World War. She was tried twice and acquitted twice. Her reputation was in eclipse, and she was half forgotten, although to a whole generation of Germans her name had been a household word. Except for the bit about her having once been a household word in Nazi Germany, not one part of the above is true. To cast Riefenstahl in the role of the individualist artist, defying Philistine bureaucrats and censorship by the patron state, Goebbels' attempt to subject her visualization to his strictly propagandistic requirements, should seem like nonsense to anyone who has seen Triumph of the Will, a film whose very conception negates the possibility of the filmmakers having an aesthetic conception independent of propaganda. The facts, denied by Riefenstahl since the war, are that she made Triumph of the Will with unlimited facilities and unstinting official cooperation. There was never any struggle between the filmmaker and the German Minister of Propaganda. Indeed, Riefenstahl was, as she relates in the short book about the making of Triumph of the Will, in on the planning of the rally, which was from the start conceived as the set of a film spectacle. Leni Riefenstahl, Hinter den Kulissen des Parteitag Films, Munich 1935. A photograph on page 31 shows Hitler and Riefenstahl bending over some plans, with the caption, "The preparations for the party congress were made hand in hand with the preparations for the camera work." The rally was held on September 4th through 10th. Riefenstahl relates that she began work in May, planning the film sequence by sequence and supervising the construction of elaborate bridges, towers, and tracks for the cameras. In late August, Hitler came to Nuremberg with Victor Lutz, head of the SA, for an inspection and to give final instructions. Her 32 cameramen were dressed in SA uniforms throughout the shooting, a suggestion of the Chief of Staff, Lutz, so that no one will disturb the solemnity of the image with his civilian clothing. The SS supplied a team of guards. See Hans Barkhausen, footnote to the history of Riefenstahl's Olympia. Film Quarterly, Fall 1974. A rare act of informed dissent amid the large number of tributes to Riefenstahl that have appeared in American and Western European film magazines during the last few years. Olympia, a 3.5-hour film in 2 parts. Festival of the People and Festival of Beauty, was no less an official production. Riefenstahl has maintained in interviews since the 1950s that Olympia was commissioned by the International Olympic Committee, produced by her own company, and made over Goebbels' protests. The truth is that Olympia was commissioned and entirely financed by the Nazi government. A dummy company was set up in Riefenstahl's name because it was thought unwise for the government to appear as the producer, and facilitated by Goebbels' ministry at every stage of the shooting. Even the plausible-sounding legend of Goebbels objecting to her footage of the triumphs of the black American track star Jesse Owens is untrue. Riefenstahl worked for 18 months on the editing, finishing in time so that the film could have its world premiere on April 29, 1938 in Berlin as part of the festivities for Hitler's 49th birthday. Later that year, Olympia was the principal German entry at the Venice Film Festival, where it won the gold medal.